All right, everybody, buckle up again for this part of the video series as we get into this preparatory work. This is probably one of the more intense topics to talk about just because there's so much content to understand and learn and make sure that at least you're up to speed, okay? So this will be like drinking from the fire hose a little bit. Pause, rewind, and rewatch this video as many times as needed. This is only applicable to those that are brand new. If you just need a refresher, this is pretty straightforward. But wrapping your head around this concept is absolutely critical to understanding data structures and how to deal with data coming in and out of N8N nodes. All right, so collections, arrays, and dictionaries. They're all pretty much similar but very different at the same time. I just want you to think of very specific use cases, and we'll go through all the examples here. All right, so these are nothing more than just a bunch of non-persistent lists. Typically, you do something in memory. Let's just say you get information from a database or a spreadsheet, you manipulate it, you do it as you're looping through it, blah, blah, blah. As all of this temporary stuff is happening in this non-persistent state in memory or the ephemeral storage, it is essentially just dealing with this all in the computer's memory in real time. Okay, these are temporary lists and are used to process items. We've talked about all this stuff before up until this point, and you've seen that when we did looping and iterations. We processed this list of items, we did an action, and then of course you can run comparison or track changes. And in one of the examples we gave, we simply just did some data splitting and some data manipulation to, update our database to make it maybe a little bit easier to use that data down this road for different use cases for whatever that might be. Okay, the other way you can use it is to package information and prepare it. Again, you've seen all of that. The other thing is important to understand is transporting information. Now, in the next section, we're going to get into some JSON. And the way that the internet talks is with APIs, application programming interfaces. And to do that, you have to transport data. And to do that, you're typically going to have to put it in JSON. And JSON is a form of collections, arrays, dictionaries, blah, 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 and so on. So, as we move into this, let's talk a little bit about collections and some of the characteristics. So collections, I want you to think of tables. Okay, now tables have rows and they also have columns. So think of the spreadsheet, okay? And spreadsheets can have one or more columns in them. They can also have one or more rows, and you'll also hear a row referred to as a record. So that's important to remember. And this is an example of a table and what this might look like in Excel. So you can see we have a table, that's the whole thing. We have 3 columns, full name, first name, second name. Like, remember we saw this before when we did the splitting. And so it's the same table, except now it's been fleshed out, it's been completed, the operation's done, and we have a full table with a bunch of data. And we again have 5 records or rows in this particular table. Okay. Arrays are usually just a list. This is harder to describe and understand than what it actually and really is. Okay, so I'll try to simplify as much as I can. So arrays typically and almost always have a single column. Okay, so I'm going to go back a little bit in the presentation. That table right there, that is what's referred to as a multi-dimensional array. If I had no columns of first name and second name, if you just deleted them off the screen and all we had was a list of full names, that is a single dimension, or that is just an array, a list of items, a list of full names. Otherwise, in its current state, it's multi-dimensional, meaning that it has more than one list or multiple lists within inside of the array, okay? And so that's what that means, unless multi-dimensional, okay? Hopefully that makes clear sense with your mind's eye by having a visual, okay? They also can have one or more records. Now, it doesn't make much of a list if you have a list with one row, but technically speaking, it could still be an array with a single item. Okay, now, arrays are indexed. This won't necessarily come up in N8N, but it is good programming understanding just in case you run against something outside of N8N that is going to be using these zero-based indexes. You can also think of this as records coming back from an API where you're having to deal specifically with the first item in an array or a list. So this is where this is going to come into handy itself. So pay attention. Now, that list, that table of full names where we had the first name, last name that I just showed a little while ago, this is where things get confusing for new beginners. The first row, the first record in that table is not row number 1, it's row number 0. And it sounds stupid, but just accept it for what it is. All things start at 0, not at 1. So we deal with arrays as index 0, which is row number 1, then index 1 is row number 2. So just think of whatever the index is, add 1 to it for what the row number actually is. So if it's index 0 and you add 1, it's row number 1. If you have index of 3, add 1 to it, it's row number 4. Okay, so maybe that'll help clarify that or make it clear in your mind's eye. Again, not important until you get into the specifics of it, because what will happen is if you don't have that understanding, you're going to get back a row of data, or you're going to get back some data that you weren't expecting, and it's because you named the wrong index, expecting shifting by 1 plus or minus, depending on what it is you're doing. You're going to get that wrong row. But just that comes from this arrays are zero-based indexed. Okay, I've already gone through all of this here. This is a visual for that. Okay, so here we have a list of vehicles and car, boat, truck, plane, tractor. Okay, each item in the list. You're seeing it horizontally. Normally lists are vertical, top to bottom. So just this is a different way of looking at it, but just understand if you had a list from a drop down in a user interface, then you'd have car, boat, truck, blah, 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 top to bottom. And then index 0 is row 1. Anyway, I'm just repeating myself endlessly for no reason on that area. All right, let's talk about dictionaries, because dictionaries are a little bit different. They're also lists as well. And I want you to go back to that key value, because again, we're getting into JSON in the next area, and this is the primer for that, because in Python, dictionaries are used quite a bit, and as you get into JSON, dictionaries are also used, so this is very important. So the curly braces are very significant, and what this means is the key is the name. Okay, so in case you forgot, in the very beginning of the series, we talked about variables. Well, here we are again, repeating ourselves one more time. And so this is some examples of what dictionaries look like. So here in the first example, you have first name, and then you have David. Okay, David is in quotes. Earlier, I gave you an example of a number, of a character, in quotes. I forget what number it was, but in any event, if it doesn't have quotes, it's just a number. But here we're just using strings and text. And then we have a second iteration or a second version of this record. So if we look at the second example, we have first name, David, comma. Now, I highlighted the mustache braces or curly braces in yellow for the second example because I wanted to give you an example that you would think that a first name and a last name is one record, right? Or one row in a database. But the way that this nomenclature and symbolism is done here is that those brackets indicate there's two rows. You will see stuff like this in databases that are like Cassandra or what they refer to as NoSQL. This is data structures in databases that don't follow normal spreadsheet tables and relations and things of that nature. So it is normal to see this way. This is going into these in-memory or even permanent or non-permanent structures. But the point here is, or the bottom line takeaway is, we have two different records, both with different column names in the second example. Just take it at face value. Don't worry about it. You'll have a specific, maybe you'll run into a specific use case where this happens in the real world, but we're not going to worry about it for this course. The most common use case is going to be the third and final example where I have it completed as a single row in a database. Notice we only have one set at the beginning of the green mustache or curly braces, and then we have first name, David, last name, Soden, and it's separated by a comma. I want you to think of a row in a database with two columns. One column is first name, the second column is last name. The value for each, obviously, is David and Soden for the other one, okay? So that's fairly straightforward there. That is it for this section. We'll do one more piece. I kept saying that JSON was the next one. No, we're going to show you one quick advanced area for the functions, and then we're going to move into JSON. We'll see you in the next video.